I have a stick. Well, more of a staff. So before I get into actually talking about the movie, this was just a walking stick that one of my, I think, cousins or second cousins or whatever had made for my grandmother. It's a really good walking stick. And before she passed, I had actually ended up being the one to get it. Well, it was a little while before she passed, and I was the one that got it, and then I painted it gold, and I just haven't done anything with it yet. I do intend to do something with it. You know, Wizard's staff, Mad Eye Moody from Harry Potter has like a staff instead of a wand, and, other characters in, other wizards in mythology and, legends and stories always have like a wand, Gandalf and everything. Or have like a staff like this. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, I need to get something that I can paint this with better. And then actually decorate it a little bit more to make it look a little bit better. Probably considering that I love bunnies so much, put like a bunny charm on it of some kind. But haven't done that yet. But it's going to go in the background. I might use it every now and then in the video as a prop. We'll see. I couldn't find that thing this morning, and I was like, where did I put my giant stick? Went behind the bookcase. Okay, that works. Yes, I have giant staff. Which is appropriate because the movie that I'm going to talk about today is Onward from Pixar. That came out in 2020. This was actually the first movie. Well, okay, so this movie came out literally right when the pandemic started, right when the COVID pandemic started. And the week previously, or like 2 weeks previously, my dad and I had gone and saw Call of the Wild with, Harrison Ford and, the dog and everything. And, we saw that one. And then, the next week or the week after that was when we were going to go see Onward, because that's when it came out. And so we're ready to go and see it. And then the lockdown happens, and it's just like, okay, well, that's not happening. Ain't gonna get to see that yet. And I didn't have Disney Plus yet at that point in time, because I just didn't yet, so we didn't get to watch it that way. And so that was when we started doing our marathoning of, the Marvel movies and the Harry Potter movies and some of the other movies that we had, and then eventually into the Disney movies, which led into just, well, I'm going to do a channel about this stuff, and leads us to where we are today. So coming a little bit full circle there. Eventually, obviously, I did end up seeing it when it went to Blu-ray. I ended up getting it, or getting it from Netflix, and then we watched it, and I really liked it. Actually, I think out of several of the Pixar movies that came out during the pandemic, which would be this, so it would be Onward, and then Soul, and then Luca. Not that I don't like Soul and Luca, but I would have to say that Onward is actually my favorite out of those three. Which I still like Soul and Luca a lot, and Soul will be the next one, and then Luca after that will be for the reviews. But so Onward, as I said, came out in 2020. And so it kind of starts off where we see this world that is, full of mythical creatures. There's unicorns and Pegasuses, and there's mermaids, and there's, dwarves and elves and wizards and centaurs and satyrs and trolls and goblins and chimeras and all this other stuff. And you see all these different creatures and everything, and you see we get kind of this overview of just the world was filled with magic and everything, and wizards had spells and they would use them to help people. And then eventually technology started to come into play, where there's electricity and all this other stuff that eventually modernizes everything, and eventually they basically have a world that looks pretty similar to ours, except for the fact that there's mermaids that have kiddie pools in their front yard, and that's where they sit, and there's satyrs and centaurs and Pegasuses and elves and all this other stuff, but they all have regular jobs. They go to high school, they do all this other stuff, just like regular Earth people do, just like people from Earth do. And so we see a bunch of that. And, eventually, magic has just been largely discarded. There's not really any magic left. Nobody really thinks that there's magic anymore. Um, and we're introduced to this family, the Lightfoot family, and, equivalent of modern times. And the youngest son in the family, who is Ian Lightfoot, who is this elf. He's this elf high schooler and everything, and he has very lacking self-confidence. His older brother, Barley, who has a lot of self-confidence, and seems to be on what his mother calls a gap year. Barley seems to be several years older than Ian at the very least. Don't know exactly how much older, but he's several years older than Ian. I don't remember exactly how old Barley's supposed to be. And then, of course, we're introduced to their mother, Laurel. And we find out rather quickly on in the movie that their father, Wilden, actually passed away just shortly before Ian was born. Ian is turning 16. It's his 16th birthday in the movie. And what ends up happening is Ian is, he's, as I said, he's very timid and shy and everything, and doesn't have a whole lot of self-confidence. And eventually what ends up happening is, like, he's trying to, psych himself up for school and everything. And, like, his mother is very encouraging of him. His brother is very encouraging of him. But his brother is very much into the concept of history and role-playing and, games and everything like that in regards to, like, Dungeon Dice Monsters. I went to Yu-Gi-Oh! Sorry. Yes, his brother is Duke Devlin. No. Dungeons and Dragons, excuse me. It's like Quests of Yore or whatever it's called. It's the game that Barley really likes to play, and that's like his favorite thing. And he's very adamant about, when, in olden days when a boy turned 16, he would have to go off and, face a horde of goblins or something like that, or go and do this or go and do that. And like all this other stuff. And, it's just like he had to prove himself and go on a quest and everything. And it's just like, well, we don't live in that time frame, so let me go and leave me alone. I have to go to school. And we're also introduced to their mother's boyfriend, who is this centaur cop named Colt Bronco. Barley and Ian don't really... It's not that he's mean to them or anything like that. He's, and I don't ever know if we find out how long the two have, Colt and Laurel have been dating. But he's a cop, and Barley tends to try to, tie himself to, different historical monuments and try to prevent people from tearing them down. And Colt has to scold him for that a lot, as does his mother. Because Barley seems to be very, like, trapped in the past in this regard. And Colt, he's not mean, as I said. It's just, he's doing his job as a police officer, but he tries to, like, bond with the boys, and it's just very awkward. Now, I don't necessarily have a whole lot of firsthand experience with this, but as I've stated before, my sister is actually my half-sister from my dad's first marriage, and she was about, I want to say 8, 9 range when my mom came into the picture as, like as our dad's girlfriend, and then eventually as, his new wife. And I don't know exactly how stuff went, but my sister was not around, my mom very much at that time frame. And eventually they do have a very good relationship now. And like my sister had asked my mom to adopt her when she was about 16. So you can see how well that relationship went and how well it's going now. Considering that last night we just had a big family dinner with my mom and dad and my sister and my brother-in-law and my nieces and nephew and everything, all of us together, which was very nice. So Colt's a little bit awkward in this regard, in regards to trying to deal with the boys and everything. And, what ends up happening is, Ian goes off to school and, he's trying to be more self-confident and everything. And he's like going to try to, speak up for himself more, do the driving test and do driving class, do some of this other stuff, ask people to the party, be more like his dad and everything. And it doesn't go so well. He tries speaking up for himself, doesn't work very well, tries the driving test, gets scared out of his mind because literally one of the first things they have them do is go onto the freeway. And I'm like, why are you making them go onto the freeway for their first time driving, you stupid teacher? And I can see this from the other way too, because I'm currently helping teach my niece how to drive. But, so I can see it from that angle too. But don't take them on the freeway first thing. That is stupid and ridiculous and way too much of a, let's do this. But what ends up happening is, Barley then, or Ian tries to invite some of these kids over that are like in his science class to come to like his birthday party. And he just flounders, and he, they kind of seem interested in it, but then it just like, Barley pulls up in his van that is named Guinevere, which is, I'm assuming, is supposed to be reference to Guinevere as in Guinevere and Arthur from, the legend of King Arthur and everything, that has like this Pegasus painted on the side of it and everything, and van. And it's this old van that that Barley rebuilt. And what ends up happening is, Barley basically embarrasses Ian in front of the kids, and Ian's just like, never mind, nope, sorry, there's no party, I'm sorry, and then leaves. And they get home, and Ian's very sad, and then their mother says, well, I have this thing that I was supposed to give you from your father when you were both over 16. Just gonna wait until after we have cake, but here you go. And she goes up into the attic and she pulls up this, thing that's wrapped in cloth that's, rather long, and she gives it to them. And it's this staff. They unwrap it, and it's this staff. It's a wizard staff, and it's just like, oh my god, Dad was a wizard, is like Barley's reaction. And Ian's like, Dad wasn't a wizard, he was an accountant. And, so it's just like, wait a second, whoa, back up here. Back up here a couple of feet. And, they find out that their dad has like written this spell that would allow his sons to be able to bring him back for a day, and they can spend the day together. And they have this thing called Phoenix Gem, and like they have to use that by putting it into the staff, and then they have to use the spell, and like they try, Barley tries again and again and again and again and again to get the spell to work, and it just doesn't work. And then Ian ends up kind of being left alone with the staff, and he ends up he ends up starting to say the spell, and the staff, the gem and the staff starts reacting. And it ends up, he reads the spell out, and then it activates, and it starts, big magic hullabaloo of sparks and stuff flying around the room, because of course it has to, because it's like, small spells are one thing. This is a big spell where you're trying to resurrect the dead. This is a much, much bigger spell in this regard. And what ends up happening is, it starts forming their dad from like feet all the way up. And, Barley rushes into the room because he hears what's going on. Their mother is not currently in the house. She went to go get the cake for Ian's party. And she's just like, Barley rushes in and he sees what's going on, and he tries to help Ian, and Ian says no. And then like there's like an explosion with the gem, and then like they're all kind of knocked around, and then they look around, and out of their closet comes a pair of legs and pants. And it's like, this is not what I was promised. And what ends up happening is they figure out that, okay, well, we have to go and we have to get another Phoenix Gem so we can finish the spell. So we can, finish the spell and get Dad's, the rest of Dad here. And so they're just like, okay, so how are we going to do that? And then, like, they get into the van and they head off on the quest. Because Ian is like, or Barley's like, well, to start a quest, you have to go to the Manticore's Tavern, and you have to talk to the Manticore and get whatever you need from them, and then you head off on to the rest of your journey. And, so they head off to go to the Manticore's tavern, whatever word for it. Yeah, the Manticore's tavern, which they get there, and it is revealed that the tavern has been turned into a family restaurant with, the manager is the Manticore, Corey, cute. I believe Corey was also the name of one of the people that worked on the movie, as like she was one of the character design people or something like that. And like I'm assuming they named the character after her in that regard. It's like Manticore, Corey, yeah. And what ends up happening is she's much more interested in taking care of her, restaurant. She's like, well, I can't send you on quest anymore because that's very bad for insurance, because if you get hurt, then I could get sued, and that's not good. And, she's very stressed as the owner of this restaurant. And, Barley tries to, convince her to give them this map, and it's just like, no, I can't do that. And then Ian actually ends up being the one, because they have their dad with them, and I think Ian was the one that made this top half for their dad that's clothes and everything that makes it look like he has a top half. And he's like, well, we need your help because we need to get our we need to go get this Phoenix gem, because lifts it up, shows her dad only half came back and we need the gem to finish the spell. And she's like, okay. And she actually, Barley or Ian actually kind of ends up, saying enough stuff that ends up sending the Manticore into a fit of rage in regards to didn't you used to be this amazing creature, this amazing adventurers and everything like that would go off on quests and battle horrible creatures and everything. And then she's just like, oh my God, what have I become? And she actually ends up setting her tavern on fire. During this time frame, the mother has come home, found that the boys have left, via looking at stuff that is sitting on her son's desk. By the way, they have a pet dragon named, I want to say Bernie. No, not Bernie. Scorchy, Blasty, something. That is a pet dragon that they treat like a dog. So that's adorable. And eventually what ends up happening is the mom figures out that, okay, so they went to the Manticore's tavern, and that's where she's heading off. And Ian and Barley have escaped. And during that time frame, Barley had been trying to teach Ian different spells. And one of them was this spell that helps with levitation. That's a loft elevar, and Ian managed to use it. And then, they're off, headed on their way, because they stole a map that tells them that they have to go to Raven's Point, and they have to head that way. And Ian's or Barley's no, we can't take the freeway. We have to take this really meandering offward path and everything to get to Raven's Point. And Barley or Ian is just oh God, why? And eventually what ends up happening is they end up, while they're driving, they end up having to stop because their car ran out of gas, and they try using a size increase spell on the gas tank, on the extra gas tank, to make there be more gas in it. And that doesn't work. It actually ends up backfiring, and Barley gets turned into little tiny Barley. And then they end up having to walk to the gas station, which is not a very good part of town, where they end up having to deal with these biker pixies, which I just already find hilarious. They're Hell's Angels, but they're pixies. And in all honesty, I mean, I don't know. It's I'm not very athletic, but I look like I could punt these things pretty easily. Just I don't know, give me a fly swatter or a tennis racket and I can knock them away. They're not that threatening. But apparently they're threatening enough because Ian is scared of them. And while they're in the gas station, their dad, that is the top half of their dad their bottom half of their dad with the fake top half, ends up making the pixies angry. And then Barley ends up making it worse because he's well, you guys used to be able to fly, and you can't anymore because you're lazy. Not you, your ancestors were lazy. And it's just Barley, shut up. It's Barley, you don't need to go and tell people again and again and again what their ancestors used to do. You don't need to do this. This does not benefit you in the slightest, and it's very rude to other people. But Barley doesn't have that sense, that common sense of don't do that. And eventually, they have to run back to the car because they made the pixies angry, and they get back to the car, and Barley is still small, so that Ian's the one that has to drive after they put the gas in the tank. And Ian is very scared while he's driving, and they're being chased by the pixies. So we have like a chase down the highway with, the pixies trying to get in and like cause trouble in the car. And like Ian eventually, Barley gets them out of, or Ian gets them out of the car, and then like they end up getting away from the pixies. And the pixies actually end up like start flying on their own, as opposed to riding on their motorcycles. So there's that. And during this time frame, like their mother has shown up at the tavern, and like it's on fire, so she's scared, and she ends up finding the Manticore, who says, no, your boys showed up and they were here, and like, one of them, had a lot of spunk and everything. Yeah, Barley will do that. No, the skinny kid. I was like, Ian? And like the mother is just like, okay, I need to get this Manticore to come with me, because like the Manticore says, I told them about the crystal, I told them about the quest, I told them about the curse. I did not tell them about the curse. We have to go get your boys out. And like their mother ends up like tricking a cop into like getting, the Manticore into her car and like driving off with the Manticore with Corey. And ends up happening is like she's like calling her boyfriend Cole to like tell him what's going on with the boys. In regards to like where the boys went. And what ends up happening is the Manticore explains, well, okay, so there's a curse on the gem, and to break that curse, I need my curse breaker stored, and I don't have that because I sold it because of tax problems a couple of years ago, so we need to go and get my sword. So they head off on this part of the quest, and Ian and Barley ends up getting back to normal size, and they end up driving off, and what ends up happening is, I believe they end up getting pulled over by these other two cops. One's a Cyclops and one's like a little satyr. Gets pulled over by them, and they end up, their dad, because it's just the bottom half, and the dad doesn't know exactly what's going on. So I'm assuming somewhere like, I guess this for the Onward version of the afterlife, there's like a top half of their dad that's just like wandering around, and everybody's like, where are your legs? My kids decided to perform the resurrection spell I told you about, and now they're just dragging me all over the place, so that's what I'm waiting for. And like, they keep, dragging their dad all over the place, which is just kind of fun. They have them like one of those retractable leashes that you use. I was about to say for kids, but for dogs. Hey, sometimes having a leash on your kid might be helpful, particularly when it's like shaped like a monkey on a backpack. We used to do that with my younger niece and the nephew, and it was very helpful. It was like, nope, you can't go over there. Get back over here. And what ends up happening is Ian and Barley figure out, okay, well, we need to make these other cops go away, so we're gonna, pretend to be Colt. So they use this disguise spell that's like, while you're using this illusion spell, you can't lie. So what ends up happening is, they're performing the spell, and, they're, doing an imitation of Colt to the other police officers, and it's just like, oh, well, yeah, I've, doing a driving lesson for Ian and everything, and, going all this other stuff, and he's just like, anytime that he lies, like he lies at one point, and it's just like part of the illusion goes away. So it's like first it's like his ear, then it's like part of his arm that disappears and everything. And like he keeps, he's like moving through these questions and everything. Like he's like answering it with his own question and like kind of stating stuff that's just like not exactly answering their question, but it's a close enough answer. And when they're getting ready to get back into the car, in the van, the other police officers was like, you just must be having a hard time with Laurel and, the boys. And he was like, no, it's fine. And what ends up happening is they say, well, what about Ian's fine, but what about Barley? And Ian ends up, because Ian's the one that's like impersonating Colt, Ian says something that actually results in like part of the illusion vanishing. That is like, instead of him like, saying that, kind of actually believing that Barley is not a screw up, it implies that he believes that Barley is a screw up, and that, kind of throws Barley off. And like literally as like they're getting back into the van, there is enough of, they're lying enough as they get back into the van that it's like everything almost vanishes, and then they drive off. And then like the other two officers are like, using their like shoulder walkie-talkies of like, get me in touch with, Officer Colt and everything. And like Barley and Ian drive off in the van, and they end up, getting to like this little rest stop area. And, Barley is understandably very mad because he thinks that he thinks that his little brother thinks that he's a screw up. And like, so they have this kind of argument and everything where, it does kind of come to the surface where it's just like, Ian is very angry at Barley because Barley keeps wanting to take like this, off the road trail to get to Raven's Point and do all this other stuff when they can easily take the freeway and then easily get off once they get there, because Barley wants to turn this into a big quest because he wants to go on a quest. And Barley keeps, kind of messing with Ian in regards to like how he's training Ian and how to, use the spells and everything. And it keeps kind of backfiring here and there with like, the size changing spell and like a bunch of other stuff. And so, Ian is, very angry with Barley about that. And he's like, you keep messing up my, I wanted to try to spend the day with Dad. And you keep messing that up because you keep wanting to do this. You keep picking fights with pixies. You keep causing all of these other problems. And I just wanted to be able to spend the day with Dad. And like, Barley keeps saying it. It was just like, I have, 3 memories of Dad, because Barley was still pretty young when their dad died, but he still has some memories of him. And, Ian's just like, but I don't have any memories of Dad. I never even got to meet Dad. He died before I was born, that whole thing. And, like Ian had made this list of stuff that he wanted to do with his dad. It was just like, talk about my life, driving lesson, play catch, bunch of other stuff that he wanted to do with his dad. And he's just, very upset about this. And like Barley had started to play music in the van, and they look over at the van and they see that like their dad's lower body is just like, dancing really badly, really badly. And like he's just like, well, he must be able to feel the vibrations of the music and everything. So he gets out of the car and he keep, the legs keep dancing all over the place. And Ian and Barley end up going over and like kind of, well, Barley goes over first and starts dancing with the legs, and then like the legs go over and like drag Ian into it. Like they're all just like dancing together and having fun. And it kind of like breaks the tension between the brothers. And it ends up being that, Ian kind of apologizes for like what he was doing. And it's just like, well, yes, we'll go on your quest. And like, they take the road less traveled type of thing. And they head off. And like during this time frame, the mom and the Manticore have ended up having to go to like this pawn shop. Goes to the pawn shop where like the Manticore had sold the sword, and like they get the sword back. They have to kind of like steal it technically, because the pawn shop owner tries to like jack up the price on the sword. And like, they get the sword and they get away. And they're heading off, and it's just like, okay, so now we need to get to where, because like the Manticore knows where like the gem is, so that's where they need to get to. And like during this time frame, the brothers are having like this very nice drive through of everything, and then they end up stopping at this giant, bottomless cavern where they have to use a trust bridge spell to allow Ian to walk across the bridge, walk across there to get to the other side where there is a, drawbridge that they lower. And, it's like he has to have confidence. He has to trust his magic and the bridge and everything to get him across. And like they started off with like tying a rope around Ian, and like the first time it didn't work because he fell because he didn't trust the spell, and then he keeps going because it works better the second time, and he's like able to walk across. And partway across, the rope, kind of came untied and like, fell away, and like Barley's like holding the rope like, oh my God, what happened? And like, Ian, manages to get almost across, and then he looks back and he sees that the rope is not around him, and he freaks and he like falls, and he like grabs on the side of the ledge and like climbs back up, and he drops the bridge for Ian and the van, for Barley and the van to get across. And at some point in time, Colt started following them and is trying to get to them. And what ends up happening is, the brothers keep going, and then they end up getting chased by Colt and several other police cars. And Ian's actually the one driving at this point in time. And they end up, getting to a place where it's like the road is closed, so they can't go any further with the road. And they've been following like the Ravens point, because there's like these giant stone ravens, and like they keep pointing to like the next statue, so it's like they have to follow the ravens to get to the next statue, to get to where they need to be. And what ends up happening is to try to like stop the cops from chasing them, they Barley sacrifices the van. He puts the van into like drive, and he puts like a rock on it to like send it flying, to rock on the brake, or on the ignition, sorry, on the accelerator, and like sends that off and sends it flying into like this rocky outcrop to like drop the rocks, not on the police officers, mind you, not on the police officers, just to hit the rocks to then make the rocks fall, so that way it stops the police officers from coming any further and following them. And so he sacrifices his van, and then they keep going, the boys keep going. Colt at least is able to see that the boys are fine, so that's at least okay. So he's like at least aware that the boys are physically safe and like they're heading off more. And eventually they end up finding where like the last raven is, and it's like pointing down at something, and they end up having to figure out a puzzle to get into like this underwater cave area. And they head off down the cave, like floating on a giant Cheeto. That Ian has become much better with his powers at this point in time, with his magic at this point in time, as they're going. And like it's just the two of them, and then like their dad's legs, which is weird. This is a very weird version of Weekend at Bernie's, now that I think about it. Not that I've ever seen Weekend at Bernie's. And like so they're going through this, and like they're just talking and laughing and everything. And Barley ends up saying, I actually have 4 memories of Dad, but I don't like the last one, and I don't like to think about it. And he was like, well, what was that? Well, when Dad got sick, he ended up in the hospital, and he had lots of tubes and stuff connected to him, and he didn't look right. And it scared me for the way that he looked. And I couldn't bring myself to go into the room to say goodbye to him. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that. And like that was like one of Barley's regrets, was that he didn't go into the room to say goodbye to his dad before his dad passed. Which I can understand where that comes from for like a little kid, because it's just like you're so used to your parent being your parent and being big and strong and everything, and then you go into this room and it's you kind of watched your parent to a degree waste away in front of you, and they're just not, they don't look right. And having all of those machines coming out of them is a scary thing to deal with, because it's just like all of this stuff is what's kind of keeping your parent alive, but your parent doesn't seem exactly like your parent anymore, because they're not as energetic or as happy and everything like that you remember from your parent. And that I can understand would be like not a memory that you want to be like your last memory of your parent. But unfortunately, that's what a lot of people have to deal with. That's what a lot of people have. And they never state exactly what the disease was that their father has, assuming it was probably some form of cancer, assumably. And what ends up happening is, Ian and Barley have this talk, and then they end up at like this other section of the cave area where they follow the river, and they end up having to fight a giant gelatinous cube, because Ian kept bringing up the giant gelatinous cube. That's what they have to fight. Or Barley kept bringing that up. And then they do end up having to work together in order to, because there's of course a moment where like the water is filling up, and like they have to have like, they send like their dad's body down to like stand on this stone, because like he can be underwater for however amount of time and not have to worry about drowning, as opposed to the boys. And like it unlocks this stone at the top, and it lets them out, and they end up right in front of Ian's school. And it's just like, what the heck? And it's just like, you took us on this whole big thing, Ian gets very angry at Barley about, like, you took us on this whole big thing and, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't get to spend any time with Dad, and we wasted all this time. And I'm going to go spend the rest of the time that we have left with Dad. With, Dad's legs. And, like, Barley goes, or Ian heads off, and then Barley heads off because he's just like, this has to be where it is. And he starts looking around, and he ends up at, like, this fountain that he had, like, chained himself to earlier in the movie, because, of course, it loops around. And Barley is dealing with that, and Ian is with, their dad's legs, and he's, like, looking at this list of stuff, and he's, like, been, like, crossing it off of, like, stuff he didn't get to do with his dad. And he, like, pauses, and he's just like, I did get to do a driving lesson, but it wasn't with Dad, it was with Barley, and, like, all this other stuff. And he's, like, remembering stuff with him and Barley when they were growing up, and, Barley, like, pushing him to be, a little bit braver and just having fun with Ian and, like, all this other stuff. And, like, Ian is having this moment where he realizes that he did kind of get to spend the day with his dad, but, because he always had Barley there for him. And, Barley there to encourage him and everything and, like, protect him. And Barley kind of didn't. Because, their dad had died, and Barley kind of took up, kind of watching over Ian as much as he could. And, and that doesn't say anything against their mother, because they love their mother, they adore their mother. And, she did her very, very best and a great job raising the two boys, definitely. And so what ends up happening is Ian runs back, with their dad's legs, which is just funny, so funny. Barley had ended up getting to, like, the fountain, and he ends up figuring up, like, a puzzle to open the fountain, and, like, there's the gem that pops up, and he grabs the gem. And then there's this red curse, smoke stuff that comes out and, like, forms around, like, flies into the school and grabs stuff out of the school and, like, things around it, and, like, ends up making this giant stone rubble dragon, which is pretty cool. And, like, their mascot at the school is the dragons, and, like, it grabs, like, the face of, like, the dragon from, like, the mascot thing, and, like, uses that stone face as, like, the face that it uses for the dragon, which I'm like, okay, the curse has some form of a sense of humor. Well done. I really like that. This rubble dragon is so cool looking. I love it. And, like, so Ian and Barley are having to, like, run, and, like, Barley's got, like, the gem, and their mother shows up riding on the Manticore, which is really cool. Riding on Corey, and, like, so Corey is, like, flying down with their mother with the sword, and, like, they're trying to, plunge the sword into the dragon, because they have to plunge it into, like, the heart of the curse to, like, destroy it. And, like, their mother gets a couple of badass moments in this, and she, like, stabs the sword into it, and, like, it stops it enough to allow Ian and Barley and, like, their dad's legs to, like, get up to this, like, this cliff that's overlooking the ocean, because, of course, why not? And they're overlooking the ocean, and, like, Barley, like, Ian performs the spell again to, like, use the other gem to finish the spell from before, and, like, he actually has Barley help him, and it, results in the spell, actually being performed and finished, and, like, so their dad's finishing forming and everything, and it's, like, this is, like, all happening, like, right at sunset, of course, and Ian's like, okay, to Barley, you say goodbye to Dad, because you didn't get to do that. I'm gonna go deal with the dragon. And he's running off and, like, using all of the spells that he's learned. The staff ended up getting knocked away, but he had, like, a splinter of it in his hand, and he, like, pulls that out and makes it big, and, uses that as, like, his conduit, and, is, like, dealing with that, and, like, using, like, this really high level electric attack, and, like, there's lots of Dungeons and Dragons references in this that are just really funny, and, like, using that against the dragon, and, causing a lot of damage to the dragon, and, like, their mother is, like, trying to get the sword to Ian, and she manages to, and, like, stabs through the dragon and everything, and, like, Colt had showed up at this point in time with, like, the other police, because, well, there's a giant rubble dragon rampaging through your town. I'm hoping you're going to show up and try to help deal with it at some point in time. That would make sense. So they're doing that. And you may hear the dog jingling in the background. Are you Jingle Puppy? Or don't. Whatever. I'm almost done with the video. Yeah, I know I love you too. Come here. Okay, fine. And what ends up happening is Amanda just looks like she's crazy talking to something off camera. Nope, it's the dog. And what ends up happening is, so they defeat the dragon and like all the rubble lands all over the place. And like Ian looks through like part of the rubble to see, their dad has formed and he's talking to Barley. And cried watching the movie yesterday during this scene. Gonna try not to cry now. And jingle dog. And what ends up happening is, they see Ian or Barley hugs their dad, and then like their dad, vanishes again. And, Barley comes down and he finds Ian and he hugs Ian and he is like, Dad wanted me to give this to you, and he hugs Ian. And, how proud their father is of them and everything. And then, they hug their dad, or no, they hug their mom and everything. And, Colt was there and like he's happy. And then what ends up happening is we cut to like a short while later and like, Corey has become much more of like embracing what she used to be as the Manticore and everything, and like having fun there. And Ian has become much more confident at school, and he's like, I guess, giving lectures on magic at this point in time, and like actually kind of has some more friends. And so we see that, and we see Colt has like embraced a little bit more of being a centaur, because he actually will like run now instead of using his cop car. And their mother, she's like, I'm gonna go hang out with the Manticore, and she like has like a battle axe, and she goes off to hang out with the Manticore. And like the boys seem to have a better relationship with Colt at this point in time. And so we see a bunch of that stuff that's just kind of fun, and we see Barley has gotten a new van, still like an old beat up van, that's called Guinevere II. And what ends up happening is Ian has actually painted a thing on the side that is like, it's another Pegasus, but it has like the two brothers on it. And riding the Pegasus and like continuing their quest and everything. So it's fun that way. There's like one song in the movie that's like, it's called Carried You With Me by Brandi Carlile, that was written for the movie. There's actually a lot of brothers involved in this movie, because like the father, or like something to do with like losing their father in the movie as well. Because like one of the director of the movie, like he lost his father when he was young, and I think he has a brother, and like that's part of that. And like the two of the guys that did the score for the movie, and wrote a lot of the songs in the movie that are just like, background, wizard rock, hard rock songs. Both of them, they're two brothers who had like lost their dad when they were young and everything. So it's just like, it's like, to draw people in. Like finds like. In regard to the cast, we have Tom Holland as Ian and Chris Pratt as, Barley. Which I saw when this movie was first coming out, and I saw the previews for it, and I figured who the brothers were. I'm like, oh God, they made Star-Lord Spider-Man's brother. Oh God, this is not gonna end well. Well, in Marvel, they're both Peter, so I guess. So, I just found that hilarious, and I'm just like, I know that part of this would have been recorded like during the time frame of like Endgame and Infinity War. Part of the recording for this probably would have happened, because like when they were making Endgame and Infinity War, and then because like during the time frame when you were like recording for an animated movie, you have multiple sessions over like several months, and then like also like a year later, and then like depending on stuff like that. So they probably went from playing like Peter and Star-Lord to being Ian and Barley. Which is just funny. Which I just find so funny. And then we have Julia Louis-Dreyfus as their mother, as Laurel Lightfoot. She's and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, of course, is best known as Elaine from Seinfeld. She's also, of course, from Veep. She's also in Marvel as really long name of character that is probably going to end up being bad. from what we've seen of her from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Um, we have Octavia Spencer in the movie as Corey the Manticore. We have Mandy Patinkin as Wilden, who is their father. And the bits where we do have like voice recordings of their dad, which isn't too many, but there's a couple. We have Mel Rodriguez as Colt Bronco. Lena Waithe as Spectre, who is the Cyclops police officer. We have Ali Wong as Gore, who is, I'm assuming, like the little one of the other police officers. There's not too many others here. There's Tracy Ullman plays like the pawn shop owner for like one scene. Wilmer Valderrama plays a guy that like Ian's dad went to college with, that the boy's dad went to college with, that Ian ends up meeting. And then John Ratzenberger, of course, because he has to pop up in every single Pixar movie, plays Fenwick, who's just like this construction worker. So yeah, there's that. I do really, really like this movie a lot. And it's a great movie to show, this bond between the two boys and everything, like even them and their mother, and everything. The mother, not that the mother really needed to come out of her shell, but she, kind of embraces a little bit more of like going on this adventure and everything and having fun that way. And like her and the Manticore have fun. So there's that. It shows you different ways of how a family can look. With that, it's the boys and their mom, so it's a single mom raising her two sons. And then there's, Colt coming in and not trying to replace their dad by any means, but wanting to have like a good relationship with the boys. So there's that. Spectre, who is, as I said, one of the other cops, like she says, oh, I've been dealing with my girlfriend, like her daughter and everything. So it's like we get like an LGBTQ relationship reference there. Kind of the hurdles of being like, a potential step parent to a degree, things like that. And, just like building self-confidence and everything like that we see like what Ian does and everything, like, good bonds between siblings and everything. So that's what we have there. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't watched Onward in a while, I would definitely advise going and watching it because it's a very good movie, and I love how they just, the world that they design is so well designed in regards to the background characters, and like one of the restaurants is called like Shire King or Burger Shire or something like that. So there's like those references there that is just really funny, and like a bunch of other stuff in the background for things, which is great. So that's what we have. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. And I think with a little bit of magic in your life, you can do almost anything.